Welcome to Common Sense. I'm John.
Hey, John. What's up today?
Not too much. Doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And I guess I should introduce myself to people watching as well. I'm Ed. And today we're going to talk about one of the fluffier areas of the marketing world, PR and public relations. It used to be, if you're a B2B company, you had to advertise. You had to go to trade shows. You had to rely on word of mouth. You had to maybe use sales channel, or you had to turn to PR. You didn't have a lot of other options. We've talked ad nauseum, throughout our Common Sense videos, as we've shared information in our book, Common Sense Revenue Growth, about how the internet and inbound marketing fundamentally changed that. But, that begs the question, what about these other channels that companies have traditionally used? And so while today we're going to focus on PR, I think before we jump into that, it'd be great, John, if you just give us your quick, rapid fire takes on those others: advertising, trade shows, word of mouth, and sales channel. Are those still viable in an internet world?
Well, I'd say in a word, yes. And we talk about this a lot more, as you said, in our Common Sense Revenue Growth book. But my short version is this. Advertising, yes, it's still very viable, but some kinds not so much, like brand or display advertising in trade journals. Those typically don't work very well. But on the other hand, PPC can be very, very effective if done well. Targeted advertising like retargeting or native advertising, those are, if you do them right, those can also be very effective. So yes, advertising is still important, but it's changed a lot. It's gone, as we'll discuss later, in a whole different direction. Trade shows, those are kind of coming back. For a while, they really weren't very popular or very effective, but I think, people are getting more into the one-on-one marketing these days and one-on-one sales, so getting people together makes a lot of sense. But it's a little different now. It's not so much about lead generation, but really, an opportunity to create more channel experiences for your prospects. As an example, people coming to your booth, they all have mobile devices. And what we're able to do now is actually send them information based on what their interests are right there in the booth, so that the whole experience becomes far more engaging, more helpful, and it's all customized to the individual user. So it's another way of doing that sort of one-on-one marketing. And then it's easy to follow up, obviously, instead of waiting for a sales rep to go through his cards and call people up. You've got automatic campaigns and ads and emails and stuff going out that's really customized to the questions they were asking. So,
and plus you set the cookie right there in the booth, which is really powerful.
It's great. It's really, in a way, it's kind of the best kind of marketing if you can really make it work right. So, but then the very best is word of mouth, I think, still, and referrals. So, if you look at what's going on with influencer marketing and reviews and that sort of thing, really understanding what people are saying about your brand and your products is really important, and having some control over that. So that's still pretty big as well. Sales channel, like the others, if you operate like it's 100 years ago, it's not going to be of much help.
Even 20 years ago.
Yeah, even 20 years ago, you're right. But if you do it right, again, if you make it, use digital channels, create a local sort of presence, specific insights, using your CRM and the technology, and then customizing your digital marketing around that, that can be very effective. So it's a matter of putting together, the company's marketing with sales channel. And then I'd say, all of these things are important if done right, and they're all largely digital now. So things have changed a lot. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly going back to our original topic in terms of PR, they've changed there quite a bit as well. And like so many things, it's easy. People do these clickbait headlines that have this binary. The world is binary. If you look at headlines, it's either something is awesome or something is horrible. And you see that about advertising. Advertising's dead. Inbound marketing is the future. Those are consistently proven short-sighted. And I think even the people that write them know that, there's a lot of gray area, there's a lot of nuance, and they're just using those titles to get clicks. But in that context, if we talk about PR, I think PR has three components. There's an influencer category. Journalists are influencers. And so as influencers, they may not have huge Instagram followings, like Kardashian kind of things, but they've got a lot of credibility and they've got a platform through their publication. So we can think of journalists as influencers. I think we also can think of PR in terms of earned media. I mean, we work really hard to have others give us space and guest blogs, whatever the case may be, where we can talk about the ideas that we think we've got some insights into. Well, that's really what working with journalists and being cited as a source in a story is about too. It's kind of earned media. And then finally, content. Stuff that you're doing for PR can be really optimized. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit later, you can optimize it probably even more aggressively and more effectively than you can a lot of your other content, because you're going to use it in a different kind of a context. Also event marketing, that's become huge. Every SaaS company out there has their, the World Success Conference or summit, whatever, and other industries are starting to catch on. Event marketing traditionally has been part of PR, and so it kind of fits really well. There's almost a resurgence, if you will, or a new growth or appreciation of that piece of it. So if you change the terms, if you don't call it, media relations, but you call it influencer marketing, if you don't talk about your clipping book, but you talk about earned media and think of it as part of your editorial calendar, and if you talk about press releases rather as part of your content rather than something you just throw out, mass blast to journalists, then really there's kind of like a PR for today's contemporary world, and PR remains very much, I think, an important part of it. So the execution, we could debate what the terms are, but the blocking and tackling may not be that different. Do you think that's fair?
I do. I think, like anything else, we've become overly interested in the technology side, at least a lot of marketers that call themselves influencer marketers. There's a lot of tools out there to find, people who will speak for your brand. Maybe you pay them a little bit here and there, but it's not the same thing. So, really, if you want to put together a stable of really helpful influencers or journalists that are willing to speak for you and give some credence to your brand, you've got to do it a different way. And I think it's a lot like account-based marketing. So you have to identify a short list of powerful influencers that are active or relevant in your space. And then you can use some of the same influencer marketing tools to identify those people, but how you follow up is the important thing. So, reaching out to them like they're a colleague is the way to go. Make some insights on their blogs or their videos or their columns, in newspapers. But don't be promotional at all. Be very professional and do your homework, add some value to whatever that content is that's out there. Then you might approach them to write a guest post on your blog or do a video interview. Give them some more juice. You're actually giving them more promotion at this stage. But once you develop that relationship, then, naturally it could go in both directions. So you could, share some of their stories and they'll share some of yours and add some value to your content. So that's really the way it works best, is first of all, making sure it's relevant. And then second of all, treating them like a colleague instead of like a celebrity. And then a lot of people talk about press releases being dead, but it's the same thing. It can be true if you just blast out a press release that doesn't really add any value and it's not very interesting, but they can be very good if you put them in the right place, use the right tactics, use, well-written content, add some value. And one of the ways to do that is to create a news blog on your site. Instead of just having your blog be all about you and all about your press releases, have a separate area that's really about that, about what's going on with the company, what's going on with your products. And you can mix in there, you can use more modern techniques like videos and interviews and announcements to make it a little more interesting. And, you can actually generate some search engine juice from that as well. So, press releases aren't the same thing that they used to be. like anything else, they're taking advantage of digital channels and sort of this new way of thinking about how to reach people. What's
Right.
your take on that?
I think you're right. I think that most companies probably make the mistake of assuming that just publishing a press release does what they need to do, or just pushing it out to a set of journalists is somehow going to get them coverage. And that may get you a bullet point, kind of the back page of most trade journals have this list of heard on the street kind of stuff, little tidbits from the industry, but that doesn't establish authority or credibility for you. It takes work. You got to research and consistently try to help journalists. Twitter is a great way actually to reach journalists. And we're kind of talking both about traditional journalists as well as about, thought leaders and bloggers in this conversation. We're moving back and forth, but journalists that get so many pitches have deadlines for stories and they just don't read press releases that get blasted at them. But if you know their beat, if you know the kinds of things they write about, if you know the angles they're looking for, the kinds of sources they use, then you can present a press release with a brief pitch that explains, how that feeds into what they do. And that after you've done some social touches, after you connect with them on Twitter or follow them on Twitter, share some of the stuff, retweet some of their stuff, pop up on their radar, and then make that kind of a pitch, it can be effective. I love the point that you made about advising clients to create a news blog. It's something that I believe very strongly in because, we talk about how blog has to be helpful content, particularly for subscribers, where you don't want to just deluge them every week or every 3 days with another, we've released this new machine, or we've got this new design, or opened this new office, or we hired this new person. All that kind of information can be helpful for you to tell Google. Each of those is an opportunity to optimize and tell the story and build it around the content pillars that you focus on and use appropriate keywords. But by setting up a news blog, you can do all that. You get the benefit with Google. You have it available for people that are searching about you, that want to know about you, journalists that want to learn about it or whatever. But you don't, abuse your regular blog subscribers that want information about what's important to them, not about what's important to you. That's a news blog is a great way to do it. I think a bigger point is the fact is that, like other businesses, you've got to, you got to figure out how to stand out. And so the stories that you pitch to journalists have to be unique. That means that you got to be willing to experiment and to innovate. And so in PR, the work of cultivating media influencers and getting earned media coverage is really going to hinge on your ability to come up with new ideas and insights and perspectives. And that's what you need to do, effectively, if you also want to market to prospects. So I think that there's an interesting parallel here between the way that you would effectively do PR and the way you market to prospects. And so it's, I think it fits in very well with the whole digital marketing dynamic. I'd say it's kind of mutually reinforcing.
That's a really good point. And I think, your point about making sure your content is newsworthy in your industry is really so important because it goes across all those channels you're talking about and all the different types of marketing you might use, including ABM.
Right.
So let's talk about, getting started doing this. What can you do if you're a company that's, not doing much PR, or maybe you're doing it the wrong way? So a lot of companies hire an agency to do this and maybe they've been with the same agency for years. You need to do your due diligence, though. I think industry expertise really matters. Pitching to journalists, you mentioned that one. Coming up with innovative ideas, you can't really do that if you're just a marketer, a generalized marketer who doesn't have any experience in the industry. So that can be an important criteria. Also understanding strategy, and also how to write for that intended audience. So those are some things to look for with agencies. You could also manage PR in-house. You have to have, again, the right talent in-house. It's sort of the same idea as hiring an agency. And in that case, you can be both reactive and proactive in your strategy to get things going. So reactive would be like using a tool like HARO, which stands for helpareporterout.com. And, you can monitor that, has long lists of things that journalists are looking for. And you can respond to those a few times a day. So but that takes time, and you also have to get their attention. So you have to, understand what they're really looking for and be able to verbalize that, articulate that in the right way. I would also say, don't forget about social media. A lot of companies just have social media people on hand for this purpose, for monitoring all the different channels, making sure someone's available and someone's responding when someone mentions your brand or responds to an article or something like that. That's an important part of PR these days. And as I said, some companies have a whole department just for that. So on the proactive side, you can use technology. So there's tools like Cision or Meltwater that helps you find reporters that cover your industries and the different issues that you're, going after. And you can use these tools to help you build those relationships, get in touch with them, share their content and do all the sort of things that I mentioned earlier. And then eventually you can pitch them on the stories that they might publish. PR Web is a good tool to use for publishing news releases over the wire. You should probably always use tools like Google Alerts and Google News to find journalists, influencers that cover topics. You can also use those tools to monitor your own brand out there over the wire. And then there's some interesting things that have come up in the past few years, like David Meerman Scott. He talks about news hacking. And so what that means is, you basically look for a story to break, and then you publish a few articles on that topic. So it might be some new innovation in your industry, or some, it could even be a controversial topic, like the government's getting involved in regulating something. And then you jump in and publish some, authoritative articles or blogs on the topic. And those are things that, reporters, journalists, they look for, and they might approach you for your comments. And then you can also look at trends in the industry. So BuzzSumo is a good place to go to look for those content trends, looking for topics and things that are of interest to reporters. And then again, same idea, publish some authoritative content on those topics. What about some other resources?
I think that's a pretty good list of resources. I guess I'd offer a couple additional thoughts. Like so much of what we talk about doing in companies, whether it's manufacturing components or just doing assembly, doing digital marketing or having an agency. I mean, you can tackle this as DIY, do it yourself, but there's a learning curve. And so how do you gauge, are mediocre results a function of the fact that it's not being done right, or you're learning how to do it, or it's not a fit for your industry? And that creates a lot of variables. So it often makes sense to start with a group that really knows how to do it and do it well. And then maybe what you do is you learn as you work on it with them.
Good point.
I'd say second, one of the things that amazes me, as digital as it is, don't assume that the PR folks that you talk to really understand digital and content as well as you do. So they'll understand the journalists, they'll understand how to write and how to pitch and all that kind of stuff. But I think, my experience is you're going to have to work collaboratively with them. I've seen a lot of PR folks that never even pause to think about how to optimize their releases so that, you're building authority around content pillars in addition to just telling your story. And third, it's work. It's just like content marketing. I mean, there's a grind. I think if you were to search hashtag grind, you'd probably find that it's increasing in usage. I see a lot of people talking about the grind, and it's true. I mean, Gary Vee carries on about the grind of doing all this kind of stuff, and it is a lot of work. Fourth, I think this really fits in well as another element in that revenue growth continuum that we've talked about so often throughout our discussions and in the book, Common Sense Revenue Growth, which I'll just say parenthetically, anybody that's interested, you can order it from Amazon by going to the URL, commonsenserevenuegrowth.com. And I guess the other thing, as I wrap up, that I would do is echo one of the things that you laid out earlier, that there's really a contemporary twist to all of this. So, journalists, just like journalists could be considered influencers today, these other elements of it fit well. And so it's, I think, something that companies, even traditional companies that haven't worked with PR before, really need to think about doing today and adapt to. What else do you have to wrap up?
Well, I guess bottom line is that companies should really reconsider their PR strategy and freshen their approach if they already have one, or get started back into it. Maybe they dropped PR a few years ago because everybody said it wasn't necessary, or inbound was the only way to go. So, if you don't have it PR, you might want to consider adding it. So I guess with that, we'll wrap up. Thanks for joining us today for Common Sense. I'm John.
And I'm Ed, and together we're Common Sense. And one last quick note, mentioned a couple times through the discussion, but our book, Common Sense Revenue Growth, was recently published by Riptide Business Press, and it's available for purchase on Amazon. It's written, John and I really set out to write it for execs and for senior managers and board directors that want to have a tool set or a framework to help connect growth strategy with the rapidly evolving sales and marketing tactics that you hear when you sit down in staff meetings and quarterly planning. So you can buy that book by going to commonsenserevenuegrowth.com. So thanks very much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you next week.
See you next time.